"It's no use, sir. We've tried everything," said Frank, the seasoned chief engineer, his voice tinged with exhaustion and defeat. In the bustling port of Miami, where ships constantly sailed in and out, the luxury yacht the Meridian, owned by billionaire Arthur Sterling, lay strangely still. Its engine had gone silent hours ago, turning the magnificent vessel into a useless hunk of iron. Arthur Sterling, a man accustomed to commanding a business empire, now felt completely helpless in the face of this baffling technical failure. The best team of engineers, led by Frank, had already thrown in the towel after hours of fruitless effort. Just as a sense of hopelessness settled over them, a calm, steady voice spoke from behind. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to take a look." All eyes turned to the speaker. He was a thin young man in worn-out clothes, looking no different from the homeless who often wandered the docks. Yet his eyes held a strange confidence and focus. Frank let out a contemptuous chuckle, dismissing him as some lunatic. But Arthur Sterling, in his moment of utter frustration, saw a faint glimmer of hope in the stranger's eyes. He decided to take a gamble. "Let him try," Arthur ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Frank was stunned. The chief engineer wanted to protest, but his boss's decisive glare silenced him. With a sigh of resignation, he turned to the stranger and gestured curtly. "Follow me." As Leo descended into the engine room, whispers of doubt followed him. "Here's the engine room. It's all yours. Expert," Frank said sarcastically, pointing to the massive engine block. Leo didn't respond. He quietly entered the cramped space, thick with the smell of oil. Ignoring the disdainful looks, he stood still for a moment, closing his eyes as if listening to the soul of the machine. The prolonged silence made Frank impatient. "Hey, kid, we don't have all day to watch you meditate." Just then, Leo opened his eyes, his gaze sharp and intense. He didn't see the engine as a complex piece of metal, but as a living organism with its own circulatory and nervous systems. His hands, though grimy, glided over pipes, feeling every joint, every bolt. He needed no gauges. His fingers seemed to sense the pressure and connections within. His focus was absolute. All surrounding noise seemed to fade away. Suddenly, his hand stopped on a section of the fuel line. He frowned slightly, his index finger tracing a joint. To anyone else, it looked perfectly normal. But to Leo, he detected a misalignment almost invisible to the naked eye. "That's one," he murmured. But he knew that wasn't all. This minor flaw couldn't have shut down the entire system. His eyes followed the tangled web of electrical wiring. He reached deep into a hidden corner that others might have overlooked. And then his fingers froze. He felt a loose connector, a small wire that had almost slipped out of its terminal. Leo pulled his hand back and turned to Arthur and Frank, his voice still calm. "I've found the problem. There are two faults." He pointed to the fuel line. "This pipe is slightly misaligned, causing an inconsistent fuel supply. But the main issue is here." He indicated the hidden corner. "A signal wired to the central control unit is loose." He explained clearly. The two faults were masking each other. When the fuel sputtered, the system registered an electronic error. But when you checked the electrical system, the loose wire would sometimes make contact and send a normal signal, leading you to believe it was fine. It was this subtle combination that fooled everyone. Frank was speechless. The explanation was simple yet frighteningly logical. Without waiting, Leo asked for a wrench and a pair of pliers. In just a few minutes, with precise movements, he tightened the bolt and secured the wire. Finished, he stepped back and dusted off his hands. "Sir, you can start it now." Everyone held their breath. Arthur Sterling, with a hint of hesitation, placed his hand on the control panel and flipped the starter switch. The first few seconds were deafeningly silent. Then the giant engine began to stir. But instead of the familiar smooth roar, it produced a series of dry, clanking sounds, followed by a short, piercing screech. Frank jumped, his face pale with alarm. "Shut it down! Shut it down now!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Something's wrong! It's going to blow!" The other engineers backed away nervously. Only Leo remained perfectly still, his arms crossed, his expression unchanged. While Arthur looked back and forth between his panicking chief engineer and the calm young man, Leo spoke. His steady voice, an anchor in the storm. "Don't worry, sir. The engine is just recalibrating itself. Give it a moment." His words carried a strange authority that made Arthur trust him. He held the switch. Just as Leo had said a few seconds later, the strange noises faded and then stopped completely. The clanking disappeared, replaced by a steady, powerful, and vibrant hum. The engine room was now filled with the sound of a perfectly revived machine. A stunned silence fell over everyone. Arthur Sterling turned to Leo, looking at him with entirely new eyes, no longer with pity or curiosity, but with deep respect and admiration. "Young man, I owe you a great deal," Arthur said sincerely. "It's terrible of me, but I don't even know your name." Leo gave a slight nod, the tension seeming to melt from his shoulders. "Leo, sir. My name is Leo Vance." The name struck Frank like a bolt of lightning. The chief engineer, who had been frozen in place, jolted. He muttered the name, Leo Vance. Leo Vance, as if searching his memory. Suddenly, his eyes widened in disbelief. He took a step forward, his voice trembling. "Leo Vance? Are you Leo Vance from the Florida Maritime Academy?" He looked closer at the young man's gaunt but familiar features. Top of his class? Broke the record for simulated engine design? All eyes once again turned to Leo. A sad smile flickered across his lips. "That used to be me," he admitted quietly. The confirmation was more shocking than him fixing the engine. A legend from the Maritime Academy, a talent predicted to revolutionize the industry. How could he have become a ragged homeless man on this dock? Arthur stared at him, astonishment written all over his face. "What happened to you?" Leo took a deep breath, as if to summon the courage to face his painful past. "My parents died in an accident. Everything. It all fell apart after that. The family business went bankrupt, and I lost everything," he said, his voice low, his gaze distant. "I've been wandering like this for the past 2 years." Leo's final words hung in the absolute silence of the engine room, punctuated only by the steady hum of the engine. Every word was heavy with pain and loss. He didn't elaborate, but the few short sentences were enough to paint a grim tragedy. From the pinnacle of a brilliant student with a promising future, he had fallen to the very bottom of society. In that moment, the image of the gaunt young man in tattered clothes was no longer an oddity, but a heartbreaking testament to the cruelty of fate. The calluses on his hands, the weariness in his eyes, all were marks of a 2-year struggle for survival on the streets. Arthur Sterling was silent. As an experienced man, he understood better than anyone the feeling of losing loved ones and watching everything you've built crumble. But hearing the story from such a phenomenally talented young man filled him with a deep sense of compassion. He saw in Leo not just the person who fixed his yacht, but the image of immense potential being tragically wasted. Frank, the chief engineer, was now filled with nothing but shame. His earlier scorn and sarcastic remarks came back to him like slaps in the face. He had read articles praising Leo Vance, admired the young student's groundbreaking designs, and now he had treated his own idol so poorly. A heavy silence descended. No one knew what to say. Leo's confession wasn't a plea for pity, but simply the unvarnished truth. It explained everything. Why a talent like him had disappeared, and why he had appeared here, in this state. His story, though brief, was a reminder that the line between success and failure, between hope and despair, can be terrifyingly thin. Arthur cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. His voice was deep and warm, no longer the commanding tone of a billionaire, but of a genuinely moved man. "The world has been incredibly unfair to you, Leo," he said slowly. "For a talent like you to be living on the streets is an unacceptable waste." He stepped closer, his gaze firm. "But I'm not making this offer out of pity. I'm making it because I'm a businessman, and I know value when I see it." Arthur paused, letting his words sink in. "I own Sterling Marine, one of the world's leading companies in marine engine design and manufacturing. What you did today, my best team of engineers couldn't do in hours. I need people like you." He looked directly into Leo's eyes, the offer made with clear and decisive intent. "Come work for me, Leo. Join Sterling Marine. This isn't charity. This is a job offer." Leo was stunned. He couldn't seem to believe what he was hearing. The sudden, immense offer left him reeling. He instinctively looked down at his dirty hands and ragged clothes. 2 years of despair had taught him never to hope. "Me?" he stammered, his voice hoarse. "Sir, look at me." "I am looking," Arthur interrupted, his voice firm. "I'm not looking at your clothes. I'm looking at what you did in the last 10 minutes. That's who you really are." For Leo, this wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline, a path back to the life he thought he had lost forever. For the first time in 2 years, a fragile but warm spark of hope began to glow in his cold soul. He looked up, and in his tired eyes, Arthur saw a flame being rekindled. After a moment of silence, Leo gave a slight nod, a barely perceptible gesture that carried the weight of a lifetime. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice still trembling but now filled with determination. "I accept." After the yacht docked in Arthur Sterling's private marina, the first thing he did wasn't to celebrate or rest. He arranged a private room for Leo, providing him with new clothes and everything he needed. A few hours later, when Leo stepped out of the shower, he barely recognized himself in the mirror. The gaunt man with tangled hair and tattered clothes was gone, replaced by a clean-cut young man in a crisp white shirt and well-fitting trousers. The exhaustion was still etched in his eyes, but now they held a spark of renewed life. Arthur waited for him in the yacht's main salon, a luxurious space with walnut paneling and large windows overlooking the glittering marina lights. "Please, have a seat, Leo," Arthur said, his tone more personal. Once Leo was settled in a leather armchair, Arthur didn't speak right away. He simply observed him for a moment, then opened a small drawer in an antique desk and took out a carefully polished ebony box. He placed it on the table and slid it gently toward Leo. "A new beginning deserves something to mark it," Arthur said. Leo hesitantly opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of deep red velvet, was a vintage watch. The ivory-colored dial was aged with time, the Roman numerals exquisitely crafted, and the blue steel hand still gleamed proudly. The gold case and alligator leather strap, though old, exuded a timeless elegance. "It's beautiful," Leo whispered, not daring to touch it. "It was my father's," Arthur said, his voice softening with nostalgia. "He gave it to me the day I officially took over the company. To him, it wasn't just for telling time, Leo. It was a symbol of trust and responsibility. He said that time is our most precious asset, and a leader must value every second. Leo looked up, his eyes filled with surprise and confusion. Sir, I can't accept this. It's a family heirloom. It's too valuable. He instinctively tried to push the box back. Arthur raised a hand to stop him, placing his own over Leo's in a warm, steady grip. I'm giving it to you today, not as a gift, but as a promise. I believe in your talent, and I trust that you will honor this opportunity, Arthur said, looking directly into Leo's eyes. Time has taken a lot from you. Now it's time for you to take it back. Consider this your new starting line at Sterling Marine. A week later, Leo flew with Arthur Sterling to the company headquarters in Chicago. In the lavish boardroom, before the senior executives, Arthur simply introduced Leo as a new associate. The meeting's focus was the latest generation engine model, the SM9000. While the head of R&D, Mr. Walsh, gave an enthusiastic presentation, Leo quietly studied the display model. He noticed something unusual. At the end of the meeting, when given the chance to speak, Leo spoke up politely. Mr. Walsh, I have a question about the position of the exhaust gas recirculation valve. Mr. Walsh seemed slightly annoyed. That position has been optimized through thousands of hours of simulation. Theoretically, yes, Leo replied, but I'm afraid that in this position, under low temperatures and high RPMs, it will create a minuscule lag in the turbocharger, reducing instantaneous performance. The room fell silent. Such a small flaw, if it existed, would be nearly impossible to detect without intensive testing. A few people looked skeptical. At Arthur's request, an engineer reran the simulation with the exact parameters Leo had provided. The results appeared on the large screen. A small drop in performance, exactly as Leo had described. A wave of astonishment filled the room. The executives looked at the young man with entirely different eyes, full of admiration. They couldn't believe someone had found a flaw that the entire R&D team had missed just by observation. On the flight back, Arthur Sterling turned to Leo, a satisfied smile on his face. You've proven your worth even faster than I expected, Leo. He gazed out the airplane window for a moment before continuing. I'm not putting you on the team in Chicago. They're too rigid. You'll start at the Miami branch. Initially, you'll work with the technical crew. Show them what you can do, just like you showed me. The offer wasn't a senior management position, but for Leo, it was everything he needed. A chance to start over. A place where his talent could be recognized on its own merit. Leo's first day at the Sterling Marine branch in Miami was not smooth. News of the homeless guy personally hired by the CEO had spread like wildfire, and he was immediately the center of scrutiny. The most displeased person was Kevin Price, the regional manager. Kevin had worked his way up from being a mechanic. He believed in the hierarchy and despised anyone who got to skip the line. To Kevin, Leo wasn't a talent, but an insult to his way of doing things. In the first team meeting, Kevin introduced Leo with a forced smile. Welcome, Leo Vance, Mr. Sterling's new discovery. He'll be joining our technical team. The emphasis on new discovery was dripping with sarcasm, and quiet murmurs rippled through the crowd of mechanics. Kevin wasted no time. To give you a chance to prove yourself, he said, his voice full of challenge, we have a tough case for you. He pointed to a large tour boat docked in the workshop, the Starfish Cruiser. It keeps stalling randomly mid-trip. My entire team has spent 3 days on it and can't find the fault. The client is putting on a lot of pressure. It has to be running by tomorrow morning. It was a clear setup. assigning a new employee a task the entire veteran team had failed at with an impossible deadline. If Leo failed, Kevin would have the perfect excuse to prove he was just a fluke. Leo simply nodded. I understand. I'll get started right away. While everyone else went home, Leo stayed behind in the vast, empty workshop. He didn't dive into inspecting the engine immediately. Instead, he reviewed all the maintenance logs and previous reports from the other engineers, systemizing what they had done and ruled out. For hours, he worked diligently in the engine room, checking every bolt, every wire, every circuit. The problem was more complex than he had imagined. Everything seemed to work perfectly during stationary tests. There had to be a factor that only appeared when the boat was actually in operation. Near midnight, after checking almost everything, Leo found a minuscule detail: a hairline crack on the casing of a high-pressure fuel injector. The crack was so small it was invisible to the naked eye, and it only opened up when the engine reached a certain temperature, leaking an insignificant amount of fuel that was just enough to drop the system's pressure and cause a stall. He had found the ghost that no one else could see. Leo didn't just replace the faulty part. He also recalibrated the entire fuel system to ensure it ran even more smoothly than when it was new. The next morning, when Kevin Price and his team arrived, they found Leo sitting beside the boat, looking slightly tired but calm. So, expert? Given up yet? Kevin asked brusquely. It's done, Leo replied. You can take it for a test run. With a look of deep skepticism, Kevin and the Starfish cruiser's captain started the engine. It roared to life with a smooth, powerful, and stable sound. They took the boat for a run around the harbor, accelerating, decelerating, and running it in every mode. The boat performed flawlessly, without a single sign of trouble. When the boat docked, the captain walked over and shook Leo's hand firmly. Thank you. You really saved us. Kevin Price stood frozen, his face turning from red to pale. He was speechless. The other mechanics, the ones who had been whispering, now looked at Leo with respect. They didn't care where he came from. They just knew he had solved a problem that had stumped them. In a single night, Leo had shattered all doubt with his sheer talent, earning the respect of his new colleagues one step at a time. After his success with the Starfish cruiser, Leo earned the respect of his colleagues and focused entirely on his work. He remained a quiet man, but his talent was undeniable. Claire Sterling, Arthur's daughter, often visited the branch to oversee projects. At first, she only knew Leo through impressive reports and her father's praises. She was curious about this quiet engineer with a mysterious past. Their initial conversations were strictly about work, but Claire quickly noticed something special about Leo. He didn't just fix machines, he understood them. The way he explained complex technical issues with such simplicity and passion captivated her. Gradually, Claire found more excuses to visit the workshop. Their conversations began to stray beyond work. They talked about books, places they wanted to visit, and their dreams. Leo, who was used to keeping to himself, felt he could finally open up. He told her about his parents, about his passion for engines since he was a child. Claire didn't look at him with pity. She saw him with admiration for his strength and resilient spirit. Their turning point came from a community project initiated by Claire, restoring an old ship to serve as a floating library for children in riverside communities. Leo volunteered his weekends to handle the mechanics. In that relaxed environment, free from the distance between the boss's daughter and employee, they painted the hull, repaired the engine, and laughed together. It was in those everyday moments that their feelings for each other blossomed naturally. One evening at sunset, after months of quiet dating, Leo took Claire for a walk. He didn't choose a fancy restaurant, but brought her back to the very dock where his life had changed. They stood on the pier, watching the gentle waves lap against the shore. A year ago, Leo began, his voice warm and deep. I stood right here with nothing. The future was a meaningless word. He turned to look directly into her eyes, his own filled with sincerity. Then you came into my life. You didn't just give me a job, you gave me a reason to believe in myself again. He slowly got down on one knee on the old wooden planks of the pier. He opened a small box, revealing a ring with a simple yet elegant design. I know I don't have a glorious past to offer, but I promise to spend my entire future making you happy, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Claire Sterling, will you marry me? Claire smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. This was what she had been waiting for. A simple, heartfelt proposal at the very place where it all began. Yes, she whispered, her voice filled with happiness. I will, Leo. I will. The wedding of Leo and Claire wasn't held in a grand ballroom or a historic castle. Instead, they chose a picturesque garden overlooking the sea, near the very Miami port that had brought them together. The ceremony took place on a sunset evening, as the last rays of sunlight painted the water gold, creating a warm and romantic scene. There weren't hundreds of distant guests, only their closest family and friends. Arthur Sterling stood in the front row, his eyes, usually sharp in the boardroom, now shining with unconcealed happiness and pride. Nearby, Frank, the chief engineer from that fateful day, was also present. He looked at the groom with a smile full of respect. Leo stood at the altar, no longer the gaunt, ragged young man. In a handsome suit, he radiated the quiet confidence of a man who had found his place in the world. When Claire, in a stunning white gown, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Leo's world seemed to stand still. All he could see was her smile, the smile that had illuminated the darkest corners of his soul. They exchanged simple vows that held all their love and commitment. As Leo slid the ring onto Claire's finger, he gently squeezed her hand, feeling its warmth and stability. It was a world away from the cold loneliness he had endured for 2 long years. During the intimate reception that followed, Frank approached to congratulate him. Who would have thought? The kid from the dock. Congratulations, Leo. You truly deserve this. Leo just smiled and nodded his thanks. He looked out at the city lights beginning to sparkle. He watched Claire laughing with her father, then glanced down at the vintage watch on his wrist, the heirloom Arthur had given him. It all felt like a dream, but it was real. From a homeless young man who had lost all hope, he now had a successful career at Sterling Marine, the happy family he had always dreamed of, and a full, complete life. The embrace of Claire, the trust of Arthur, and the respect of his colleagues had filled every void left by his past. The story of Leo Vance wasn't just a modern-day fairy tale. He became living proof that with just one chance, with just one person's belief at the right moment, a life can be completely transformed. And sometimes, that chance comes in the darkest of times, from a calm voice rising out of despair. If you'll allow me, I'd like to take a look.